Time. There we go. And go to our slideshow from the beginning. Okay, cool. Those of you who have been signing in, you know, this is one of my favorite photographs taken by a friend of mine, Maddie Hanna, about 15 miles south of where I am now in Port Orford. Thanks for joining us. This is part of a weekly or a monthly webinar series that we started last year to keep folks in the loop on what we're learning and also get some feedback from many of you on what we're doing. And then we're going to focus on, I have a guest with us, Nikki, who we will introduce in a little bit. We're going to talk to you about what we're seeing in 2021 in terms of our policy perspectives and priorities. So Ocean formed just last December around a citizen's interest in organizing some public forums. And that citizen is David Petrie, who's now the president of Ocean. But what he wanted to do was let the public know about the ongoing BOEM and State Offshore Wind Task Force for Oregon, and to initiate a local coastally focused conversation about if it would work for us, and if so, how we could do that. In the course of the months following, we did a lot of outreach and continue to do so to make sure that we've got a board of directors that's representing various coastal interests: climate action, tribes, maritime commerce, resilience, manufacturing, sustainable development, electeds, conservation, economic, workforce and supply chain development, labor, the public, and investors. And as of last Friday, we've got a good thumbs up from a lifetime commercial fisher out of Charleston that's interested in stepping onto our board too. So very pleased with that development. Our mission is to explore the opportunities and challenges of floating offshore wind and to support the responsible development of that and any other advanced energy technologies, and to maximize those benefits for the planet, the people, and our coastal communities now and for generations to come. So our MO is to expedite and influence the inquiry. There's a lot of study going on, as we'll talk a little bit about offshore wind, but really to maximize those environmental and societal benefits to Oregon's coastal communities. And at the same time, we've been filling a need for Oregon coastal community representation in the energy sector policy proceedings in Oregon, as well as the Northwest. So here's kind of a look back on what happened this last year. A lot of you have seen this slide in my previous decks over here from the left. This was from the Department of Energy's biennial energy report that was issued in 2018. This last year, Ocean provided a lot of comments on to ODO's staff in preparation for their 2020 report. Here's the image you see over here. And as you can see, all of these are the generation sources for the electricity and energy that Oregonians use. We're still importing a lot of our energy. And what we learned through the course of this refresh of the biennial energy report is that ODO does not have the funding or the authority to meet our complete request for the level of electricity information that we have requested. We'd like to see that change in the years to come. This is another slide from that same biennial energy report. I have spoken with ODO, and they have tentatively confirmed that they will be our feature presenters in March, so we can drill down into the biennial energy report. But this kind of gives you a good picture. You can see we're still importing more electricity than we're generating in state or exporting. And you can see the mix here is still pretty dirty. And we've got renewable portfolio standards to the north and the south of us that we're squeezed in between. So Oregon coastal communities, as you see here, these are transmission lines for electricity. We don't have any electricity generation out here on the coast, so we're completely reliant on imported energy. We've got constrained transmission lines through catastrophe-prone routes. A lot of the electrons, like I'm sitting down here, they're coming from way up here in the Bonneville system. So all of these transmission lines have to bring those electrons way down here to the end of the line instead of having some production here. So Ocean did provide some comments to DLCD's climate framework to underscore the importance of clean energy security as a critical tool both for climate adaptation and mitigation, particularly for those of us hit first and hardest at the end of the line. We also engaged directly in 12 months of Oregon PUC proceedings on distribution system planning. We advocated for funded ratepayer representation in those processes. We increased data access for community energy planning and the integration of distribution and transmission planning practices so that the investor-owned utilities, at least, can do a lot better job of identifying local energy generation and storage solutions. As you can see, we're talking to you from down here, but there's a lot of energy burdened households in the state of Oregon. And that's something that we're very, very well aware of. Over here, you can look at Coos Bay's mix that's coming out of the Biennial Energy Report. Also, we've got very high poverty numbers and a lot of folks that are energy burdened. So as we move forward for any energy policy, we're very, very, very sensitive to ratepayer protections. We've been advocating for the expansion of planning and investigation activities that are currently occurring off of the coast of Northern California for their two call areas, one up in Humboldt and the other down in the Central Market, to expand the scope of those to include Oregon. Over here, the darker the red, the richer the resource. That's Saudi Arabia wind off of our shared coast. And as we know, the birds and the fish don't stop at the border. So it makes sense to us in so much as we are looking into the environmental impacts, fleet impacts to our fishing fleets, how our ports are going to serve this new emerging market, that we should be included at the same time with California for higher efficiencies. We learned this year that Oregon has the capacity in its existing transmission system to utilize up to 3 gigawatts of clean Oregon electricity, not for export to California, but for Oregon use. So we've been socializing this, making sure that our coalition members in the renewable energy sector and social justice are aware of it. And we've been really advocating for its inclusion in utility proceedings, state renewable portfolio standard planning scenarios, and regional clean energy modeling. We continue to engage with the contractors who are working on the US Department of Defense funded Oregon Renewable Energy Siting Assessment. We have another update later on today. This is just one slide from their recent update deck that's showing the different renewable energy sources that we have here in Oregon. And you can see that offshore wind has some potential, a lot of potential and some fantastic capacity factors there. This is a slide from a previous update from that same report. Basically, what the contractors on the Electron side of this study are doing is asking the question, how could Oregon build its own clean energy resources to meet its 50% renewable portfolio standards over the next 15 years? And one of those planning scenarios is to include offshore wind. Want to point out that if we are able to bring online 3 gigawatts of offshore wind from the west, it frees up 3 gigawatts of transmission from the east to meet those Portland markets. So actually frees up another 3 gigawatts for our renewable energy friends, coalition members to install in central and eastern Oregon to meet our own needs. Double whammy. As I said, we're really sensitive to ratepayer protections. So we're investigating emerging global voluntary energy and carbon markets. We've been meeting with developers, investors, and off-takers about our Oregon opportunity. Just this last year, we saw almost a gigawatt power purchase agreement for an above market price offtake working with Ørsted. So things are really changing very quickly. Looking back here at the state and region, Ocean has been collaborating with our strategic organizational partners like Renewable Northwest, Northwest Energy Coalition, and Pacific Ocean Energy Trust to engage in all of the open docket proceedings at the Oregon PUC and regional that would impact our energy markets. I should add here a huge thank you to Pacific Ocean Energy Trust. They have funded a part-time position for me to be their policy director. So in some of these, I get to directly engage. And Ocean's been advocating for the inclusion of green hydrogen infrastructure and co-location with large renewables in the state through regional resource adequacy and transmission planning activities, both of which are going on. We recognize that surplus floating offshore wind during times when it might otherwise need to be curtailed because it's producing more electricity than is needed can be used to generate clean green hydrogen, particularly in ports like the International Port of Coos Bay that's all plumbed up for natural gas. There's a lovely opportunity for us to look to the future and start planning for that clean transition. Not only can green hydrogen provide storage components for energy security, but it can also be used to decarbonize the maritime, fishing, and transportation sectors. Ocean has been requesting of BOEM, and BOEM has been really, really responsive to provide support and analysis for the role of Oregon's ports in the supply, assembly, and/or service of West Coast offshore wind. Just another earlier funded BOEM report found that 3 gigawatts of initial development would infuse somewhere between $9 to $21 billion into Oregon's economy. Here's the traditional public involvement model that's being used through the BOEM process. It's very developer driven, high up. So over here where we are now, when folks are kind of brainstorming and testing what this simulation might look like, and specifically where it would go, where it's more pliable, there's not a ton of external participation in the nuts and bolts of actually shaping up what this will look like. So when you really get that high level of participation, oftentimes the projects are less pliable. This is something that's been recognized by the fishing industry, who's ahead of us over on the East Coast in development. And we're trying to get ahead of that on the West Coast by flipping this over, certainly not getting in the way of BOEM's process, which we fully support and are engaged in, but complementing it so that now, while we're still putting our pencil down to paper and drawing up what this might look like, we would really like to see the fishing community and our coastal manufacturers, shipping community, and ports involved. So our goals are to maximize and multiply our coastal community benefits and to minimize coexistence conflicts through frontline project shaping. Kind of taking from a business standpoint, a SWOT analysis. Who's most deeply impacted? That's our front line. And acknowledge what are their strengths? What do they bring to this that could be of value for the coastal communities, as well as the design and deployment? What are the weaknesses? Where are there networks that we can align and strengthen those frontline communities? Look for opportunities that we can leverage multiple and expanded benefits and minimize the threats. So how can we best design for safe, sustainable coexistence? Here are those frontline communities that we've identified and been working with over the course of the last year. And of course, there are potential barriers to offshore wind, specifically compatibility with other beneficial uses, electron affordability. How expensive will this electricity be when it hits our coast? And for long-term, beyond 3 gigawatts, we need some transmission if we'd like to get into the export game. Some studies that are underway or pending funding that Ocean has supported, Ports Infrastructure and Development Plan Assessment, another NREL, just complete comprehensive West Coast port assessment, E2, which is environment and economics. They'd like to replicate their East Coast study out here on the West Coast. National Renewable Energy Laboratories is moving forward with transmission assessment, kind of a next level. And PNNL the same, to take their grid value of Oregon offshore wind to the entire West Coast. Wonderful studies that should be funded, and we wholeheartedly support them. What we'd like to do is take it a little bit next level in terms of that coexistent design. Specifically, we recognize that we have tremendous resources in our academic community at OSU in the various areas of study that they have here. We've got shipping, we've got fishing, and we've got coastal manufacturing. So we'd like to get them all together so we can start looking at the design for ecosystem services, impact minimization, fishing, net benefits to fish stocks, and shipping community. Planning process is underway. The ocean is advocating for offshore wind inclusion. These clean energy roadmaps, transmission, decarbonization strategies, not just for electricity, but also for transportation, coastal infrastructure investments, fisheries management, resource adequacy, and the Northwest Power Plan. With respect to labor, Ocean is working with the Blue-Green Alliance, Oregon Building Trades, and IBEW to develop an Oregon offshore wind labor memorandum of understanding. We're also taking a seat at the newly formed Oregon Coast Maritime Workforce Development Table. Ocean has been investigating opportunities for planning and deployment and operations that could result in a net benefit to our West Coast fishing fleets and communities. We understand that offshore wind poses a huge threat to our fishing community. Over to the right here, you can see some of my sloppy highlighting on a report that was developed by Pacific Fisheries Management Council, identifying the factors that will have the most impact on our fishing fleets to 2040. And what we've done is kind of highlighted those areas where offshore wind could have a net benefit. And we'd like to get moving on putting together some strategies and plans to make that happen. Along those lines, we've been having conversations with ROSA, which is the Responsible Offshore Science Alliance, heavily affiliated with East Coast developers as well as East Coast fishing fleets, and moving over here to the West Coast to talk about California and Oregon. They will be our featured presenters at our February webinar. We have tribal leadership both on our board and with our affiliates and executive advisors. We've been doing a lot of wonderful work, and I've been learning a lot about the wonderful work and resources that we have with the affiliated tribes of the Northwest Indians. We were able to contribute to their lead in the tribal review of the Congressional Action Plan on Climate Crisis, which you can check out right here. That was a national effort that is a fantastic document. We've also recently, and I believe Ruben might be on this call, Renewable Northwest, who's one of our strategic organizational partners, has a new tribal engagement staffer working on the energy, NREL's Tribal Energy Pathway Study that will be working with our tribal connections. And Ocean members have been drafting a resolution for consideration at ATNI's upcoming quarterly meeting. And we've been funding for tribal representation in Oregon PUC proceedings in the 100% clean energy legislation development and with Oregon's Ocean Policy Advisory Council. Ocean believes it's in our best interest for us to really deepen and further understand our resources, our environmental context, and biological interactions with the physical conditions of our deep offshore ocean environment. We've been advocating for increased and enhanced studies and kind of try and, as I said, move up our study schedule so we're more in alignment with California. We were able to supply comments and content to PNNL at their request for information earlier this summer based on some of those inquiries. We've been doing a lot of networking. We've now got 190 on our listserv tracking us. And we have focus groups that have been developed. Certainly, as things continue to escalate here in Oregon, those focus groups will get more engaged, and we would love for you to participate if you're interested. We have an outreach plan that we would like to take as soon as COVID allows us to, that would complement our digital outreach with some boots on the ground outreach to get some input, provide information, but go to where people naturally meet. Not everyone wants to jump on a webinar or go to the city hall for a public meeting. So figure out, where do people meet and congregate naturally, bring the information, and keep our ears open so we can get some better feedback. This is just another slide of our outreach. This is also important to note that on our board of directors, Ocean has a lot of folks that previously, for other proposed energy projects around the South Coast, have stood opposed to one another. But in this case, we're all pulling in the same direction. So very exciting. And we became a 501c3 pending organization. And we are seeking private and public nonprofit partnerships, contributions, and resources to continue with our work here. And along those lines, if you'd like to jump in and become a member, we'd love to have you. We also have dues-free reciprocity with other 501c3s when that's mutually beneficial to us. And we have some provisioning sponsorships that are available, so we can acknowledge those sponsors as we deploy programs like our webinars today. So now I'm going to pause, and we're going to shift gears a little bit and start talking about our policy perspectives. I'd like to engage or introduce my friend, Nikki, and she can say her last name because I can't. And it's interesting hanging out in Salem with her because the legislators kind of stumble with it as well. But I'd like to introduce Nikki. She's fantastic, and she's on the line here. So Nikki.
Hi, thanks, Shannon. Hopeful my sound is coming through okay. I'll just look for some nodding heads. Great, okay. I am Nikki Terzieff, and I can promise you the only person who says that name correctly is my father, because he's got the great accent still with the whole name. But yeah, they've over the years have managed to figure it out. And each time we get a new crop of legislators, got to start all over. But that's not unique in advocacy, is it? And I think before I really jump in, I do just want to say, although he's listed under Katie Iman, we do have Bill Bradbury here on the Zoom. And I just want to say thank you, Mr. Bradbury, for all the work that you've done for the state of Oregon over the years and continue to do. I don't think there's a Zoom room I'm in related to climate change that I have not seen you participating in. So thank you for that. The legislative session. Is this where we're going, Shannon? You want me to dive into the legislative session here?
Yeah, I think so. Let's get right there.
So, who knows, gang? I mean, I'm just being honest with you, right? Like everything else right now, during COVID, the pandemic, the Patriots, all the things, the Capitol is at a standstill. And that's very spooky because it's such a physical process. Normally you would have hundreds of people in the hallways. You all would be showing up in 15-minute meetings back to back, running from the Senate to the House, trying to have conversations, putting forward Ocean's agenda, putting forward what your allies are doing, maybe trying to stop some other things as well. And we just don't have that opportunity this legislative session. That is hard, and that is a change. But it offers a different opportunity, which means many of you who are traveling from all across the state into the heart of the state, into Salem, won't have to take a day, maybe 2 days off of work to get there. You won't have to, stress and strain about who's going to carry the workload while you're gone. You can pop into a Zoom room, you can pop into a Teams meeting or a Google Hangout or whatever the platform is going to be. So in some ways, it offers the opportunity for people to engage in a really kind of renewed fashion And I'm hopeful that that means we get additional amounts of public input, we get additional amounts of advocacy. For you all, it might be what Ocean is up to, or one of my clients is OSEA. That's where Shannon and I have had the chance to partner together. You know, I'm glad that more of those members are going to get a chance to participate. And so I'm going to take that positive bent, although sometimes that's hard to do in these realities, but I'm going to take that positive bent and just say, download your teams. One of the things that's going to be the challenge this session is over communication. We will all need to over communicate into the legislature to make sure that we're getting what we need. So if Shannon sends out an action alert and says, hey, you need to write the members of the Energy and Environment Committee in the House and let them know that we're for this or against that, please do it. That's going to be the most important 5, 10, or 15 minutes of the legislative session. That 5, 10, or 15 minutes it takes you to engage and to advocate and will be what makes the difference. So that's my plea to all of you to be engaged and remain engaged in it. As daunting or as difficult as it may seem, it's going to be vital to getting good policy out of this legislative session. And there's a lot of good policy out there. As Shannon's got up here, the 2021 legislative session, this is the 81st Assembly. And you've got an interesting mix, you know, Oregon, and I think depending on where you live, you may feel the push or the pull of one party, but we're really quite reflective of the rest of the nation. We had a lot of very tight, very expensive campaigns and races, and the outcomes left us with a pretty decent mix of makeup of Democrats and Republicans. And so going into actually, Shannon, will you go back to the dates for me?
Yeah.
Thank you. So going into the session, we're here, we're started. This is it, you're in it. It's the 19th. And they've already come in, you know, last Monday, they showed up in person. They took their oaths of office, and we started with a real kumbaya, you know, ready to go to work. And this week, because of the activity that's been happening around the Capitol, both in Salem and nationally, all the capitals, they've opted to not meet again in person. So where this week, the 19th, would normally be all of the committees getting underway, this afternoon, we'd probably be getting ready for our first hearing or watching our first committee meetings. That's not happening this week. That'll happen next week. It's all going to be virtual. At least they say until April. I'm going to bet that it's the whole 6 months. This is a 6-month legislative session because it's an odd numbered year, as opposed to the 35-day legislative session that occurs during even number years. So here we've started January 19th. February 23rd, deadline to introduce bills. Now this is tricky because it is actually the second deadline to introduce bills. Back in December, on December 21st, was the first deadline. And those are called pre-session filing. That is the first round of about 2,000 pieces of legislation that have come out. We can expect this February 23rd deadline to bring, you know, another 800 to 1,000. Overall, we're going to see several thousand pieces of legislation being proposed. You all are multifaceted human beings, so you probably don't just care about the climate change issues or the energy generation issues, but you know, there's going to be a lot of conversation around taxes. There will continue to be conversation around healthcare, of course, unemployment, all of the other things that touch your life. So I would say get familiar with the Oregon Legislative website. You can poke around in there and find bills and hearings and agendas. And of course, the stuff that's related to Ocean, Shannon will be sure to send out. March 19th, April 13th, all these things that talk about work sessions and chamber deadlines, you know, this is just kind of fancy speak to say, hey, if you got a House bill and you don't have a vote to get out of committee, you're not getting to the floor of the House. And if you don't get to the floor of the House by, this is going to be April 13th on this slide, then you're not going anywhere this session. You know, sorry, thank you, consolation prize, come back again next time. And if you've got a House bill, you've got to get over to the Senate there in April, mid-April. And if you've got a Senate bill, you've got to get over to the House there in mid-April. May 19th revenue forecast, that's important. That is crucial. No surprise to all of you, we have suffered an economic strain, I'll characterize it that way, because of the pandemic and because of joblessness. And it has complicated everything else, including how they're going to budget. The one duty, the constitutional duty that the legislature has, is to balance the budget and create a budget that's going to work for the state of Oregon. This is going to be a major challenge for them this year. They're looking at cutting, $1,000 off of a program. I mean, they're literally in the couch cushions looking for change this legislative session. So keep your eye on May 19th, because then we'll know kind of what we're playing with. And a handful of the bills that you all will be watching and tracking and advocating on are going to cost money. Might not be in the millions and millions, but it may be enough to trigger what we call a fiscal. And that fiscal is a price tag, and that price tag can really be impactful on your success. And then so you kind of come down to the end here in late May and in late June, and this is when it's all wrapping up. We have been in the throes, at this point, we have been in the throes of Ways and Means fights, which is all the budget fights to see what's going to happen. Anything that's major and controversial that has the potential to trigger a walkout. We've heard of those several times here in Salem. That's all going to be happening down at the end of June. If we do our work right, none of our stuff will be there. We'll all be done and taken care of early on in the session, and you can enjoy a full summer. But if that doesn't happen, then you're going to be sitting in front of these committees. Shannon, if you'll go to the committee slide, that would be great. Thank you. You'll be sitting in front of these committees and spending a lot of time with these key players. And what you see here are both the House and the Senate committee rosters. These rosters, again, this is off of what we call OLIS, which is the Oregon Legislative Informational something, OLIS. .oregonlegislature.gov, and maybe we can put that in the chat. But this is your library. For me and for Shannon during the session, this is our Bible. We're going to go here. We're going to find out who serves on the committees, like you're looking at here. You're going to find out the agendas when they're posted. They have to be posted several days in advance at this point. Later on in the session, they will have a 1 hour notice. So, gird yourselves, basically. And these folks here, we'll start in the House. These folks here all have some really great experience with energy and environment and climate. You're going to be hard pressed to find folks who, don't care or are unengaged, because they request committees and they don't get all of the requests that they make, but they let it be known to the Speaker or to the President of the Senate. Those are the two offices that make the appointments for committee membership. They let it be known what they're interested in, what they want to work on. And so it's really nice to know that as you're sitting in front of the committee, you've got people who are interested in what you're saying. They want your perspective. They need your perspective. I can say actually 0 of the 90 legislators, 30 in the Senate and 60 in the House, 0 of them are energy contractors. So, we sometimes have to start at the bottom with the education, but what's important is that we have an opportunity to be in front of those who are the deciders, and these are your deciders right here. Representative Pam Marsh is from Ashland. She's a Democrat. She's long been a fan of climate resolution policies, let's maybe say it that way, and has introduced a handful of her own. Representative Ken Helm, who's done a lot of work in the energy space. He's an attorney in his day job and mostly does water laws and land use, but because of that is really steeped in a lot of the discussion that they'll be having in that committee. Vice Chair Ken Helm and Vice Chair David Brock Smith. David Brock Smith is right around the corner from where Shannon is sitting, I believe, today, and comes from the coast, is a good champion for the issues that you're going to be focused on and working on, and is moving his way up the ranks as far as kind of being a broker. He's willing to do some bipartisan work, and he's known for that. And so it's a great kind of friend to have in our, I'm not sure if that's an echo or if somebody needs to please hit mute, but that would be helpful.
My sister, for me, and the people I grew up from, have lived for.
Shannon, you might be able to find them and mute them.
I'm trying to find out who that is.
Thank you. I'm going to keep going on. Diego Hernandez is from deep southeast Portland, and he represents the BIPOC communities that reside in that neighborhood and in that district, and is bringing, along with CONFAM, really that environmental justice perspective. And then Mark Owens from like pretty much all the other opposite way of the state from David Brock Smith, coming in from the east. He's in Crane, Oregon, if some of you know where that is, right outside of Burns. And really, I think, has a lot of that development knowledge, and of course, a few developments in his own backyard. Over to the Senate, Senator Lee Byer. Senator Lee Byer comes from the PUC. I mean, plain and simple, that's his background, PUC regulator. He knows the terminology, he knows the language, he knows a lot of the players that have been in the process. I think it would serve everybody well to make sure that Senator Lee Byer knows some of the new faces and some of the new organizations and some of the new associations that are entering the scene. It's going to be important for him to be able to take that real holistic look as chair of that committee and make sure that all the pieces are fitting together. As Shannon has alluded to, there will be some pieces of legislation that are going to weave climate and energy policy into kind of one helpful basket for 2021. And we want to make sure that the chair is able to carry the basket, just to stick with a silly analogy. Vice chair there in the Senate, Senator Lynn Finley, he and Mark Owens share a district out in Eastern Oregon. Dembro from Northeast Portland. Senator Art Robinson, some of you may know his name, those of you in particular down in kind of the southern central part of Oregon. Senator Art Robinson is coming in and I think has some, strong and interesting opinions in this regard, and whoever is going to volunteer or be selected to be the person that adopts Senator Art Robinson will be happy to hear your reports back. And then we have Senator Kathleen Taylor. Senator Kathleen Taylor is out of Milwaukee. And Senator Kathleen Taylor, I should say, has also had a lot of experience previously, as has Michael Dembro, with the Natural Resources Committee, with the Energy and Environment Committee in the Senate. They call them different things and they reconfigure some of the membership, but for the most part, you can think of them as all kind of hanging in the box of energy generation, development, regulation, and climate policy. So you have another slide, Shannon, or have I talked enough? You never ask a lobbyist to talk, folks. That's the problem. Tell me where you'd like to go next.
No, you're doing great. I'm going to lead into some of the legislative concepts that we're tracking, but also let folks on the call know that thus far we've spoken with Senators Taylor, Dembro, and Byer. We have a call scheduled for this afternoon with Senator Robinson. We've met with Reps Helm, Brock Smith, Hernandez, as well as who did I leave off there? Oh, Power, Representative Power, when she was the chair. So we're making some good headway. And Gomberg. What's not listed here, this is the energy committees, obviously, but in Oregon, we have a coastal caucus that traditionally has been one of the most strong caucuses in our legislative chambers. So really doing a lot of outreach to our coastal legislators to make sure they know who we are and what we're looking at. So what are we looking at? There are two pieces. There were originally three pieces of legislation that were dropped around some form of 100% renewable portfolio standard or clean energy standards. Now we're down to two of them, and they're really interesting. I think that this is actually an ideal situation for us. One of them, which is the R100 responsible RPS, has been largely drafted by Jake Stevens. He's a utility scale solar developer out of Bend. And he's been working really closely because of his experience developing utility scale solar to identify in that bill what the barriers are to further development and taking a perspective of how do we get this to pencil out and make sense for the investor-owned utilities so they can get behind this. So he's calling this a responsible bill. There is not a draft that is shareable yet. He is expanding his table and getting more input, but that one is going to be dropped by Rep. Helm. On the other side of the equation, although aiming at the same target, is a 100% just energy concept. And the big question there is, what are the impacts of our energy systems on our communities? And how do we approach 100% clean or 100% renewables and bringing up all of those frontline communities? So that's a wonderful, wonderful approach to have also. So we're kind of coming from the social justice, environmental justice approach on one end, And then from a pragmatic utility, how do we build it nuts and bolts and remove those policy barriers? I'm very hopeful. We're definitely involved in both of those conversations. Ocean sits at the policy table for Verde's led efforts on the 100% just energy concept. And I'm in close contact with Jake Stevens regularly on his bill. So I'm really, I'm kind of Pollyanna in this, in that both of these pieces of legislation are going to prompt some really in-depth, interesting conversations. We're going to come out of this session, if not with a bill that passed, with a lot better understanding on behalf of all of our coalition members, all of those impacted, and most importantly, our legislators. What does this look like? What would it feel like? What are our existing barriers, and where do we go from here? So regardless of passage or not, I think this is a wonderful development, and there are some fantastic concepts included in both of those approaches. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Nikki, on the likelihood of anything moving on this.
Sure. I share your optimism, Shannon. I think we're in a really great space for something to pass. As some of you who may have been involved in the process, in the legislative process before, won't be surprising to hear. I think we're going to find a negotiation that's forced, that every party, all the parties will be brought to the table by their earlobe and sat down and said, now what can we work out here? I hear this juncture, I hear a lot of optimism about getting to a change in the RPS for sure. I think there are a couple of components in each piece of legislation, each of these two proposals that can match up with enough negotiation, and that would be around maybe labor standards and what I would describe as sourcing of the energy, making sure that the energy is coming from Oregon and Oregon-based projects. Then there's probably a couple of pieces that they just are never gonna be able to weave together, and that's gonna be where the rubber hits the road for this proposal. That's my prediction anyway, is that these two will get merged.
I agree, and that's natural gas. That's the that's where there's the real hiccup. There's this tail when we're trying to squeeze out and get that to that final 5% to the 100%. There's a lot of discussion and disagreement about whether or not we need something like natural gas to help that out. And for that reason, we Ocean and POET are very, very much heavily engaged in any of the energy modeling activities that are surrounding both of these concepts to make sure that we've got 3 gigawatts of floating offshore wind by 2030 as a planning target included in there, because it not only brings us closer to meeting our needs for our existing 50% RPS, but it really strengthens the argument for getting us across the line on a more aggressive RPS. Remember, that's 3 gigawatts that floating offshore wind would provide, and another 3 gigawatts of transmission that's freed up for Central and Eastern Oregon, which is now constrained. Payment in lieu of taxes extension. This, remember, Ocean, it's not just about floating offshore wind. We're looking for clean coastal energy security. And we're looking for distributed generation. So utility scale all the way through rooftop kind of installations all over the state of Oregon as a resilience measure, as well as economic stimulus. CREA is no stranger to the pilot program. This is an existing program that we have out here on the coast. I don't know that we've ever really utilized it because we haven't gone to the level of utility scale solar yet out here, but this would extend a very popular program, and it would potentially lower the amount of the payments. I think that's still in discussion. So we're watching that and definitely supporting the continuation of that program. Same story with the public purpose charge. The investor-owned utilities in Oregon, they charge a 1% fee to all of their ratepayers that goes into a public purpose, which is Energy Trust of Oregon. Energy Trust of Oregon then turns around those funds and resources, and some of those resources are not just financial, but they're like brain resources for energy efficiency, renewable energy projects. This has been led by the governor's office. Of course, the ETO exists now, but it was subject to sunset coming up, I think, in 24. So we started talking about this a couple of years ago and have been working very, very closely with the governor's office. You can see a long coalition here. And of great importance is that we've got PGE and PAC Power supporting this, as well as CUB. So important work there. One of the bills that Nikki and I got to work on behalf of OSEA in previous sessions was a solar plus storage rebate program. We initially went out and asked for $30 million and we're almost laughed out of the building, but we got all the way to the Ways and Means discussion thinking we were gonna get $5 to $10 million maybe, and ended up walking out with 2. But at least we've got a program. It did launch at the beginning of last year and was tremendously successful. Some of the lessons that we learned in passing that bill is the importance and prioritization for legislators of energy equity. And that is not just about income equity, but thanks to a lot of ocean and loud mouthing out here from the coast, it's also about geographic equity and making sure that when we invest as a state in clean energy projects, it's not all just going to Portland Metro, which is the perception of some of those. So there are like belts and suspenders in this legislation that we passed to make sure that our low income Oregonians, as well as those living in geographies that don't get the benefit of Energy Trust of Oregon, get these investments. So this is not a bill. We've got a bucket, we've got a program, we've got folks that are really interested and would like to do more projects, and Department of Energy would like to see this funded. So it does have a budget ask of $3 million. As Nikki said, thinking that might come from the general fund is not super pragmatic, but we are hopeful that a Biden administration will pass some federal recovery dollars, and specifically around green recovery, that this would be a great program for them to drop $3 million into.
May I add one thing to that, Shannon?
Yeah.
So we did see some progress in our, relationship with the agency on this bill. And as Shannon's indicated on this slide, they have decided to kind of roll this into their budget. So while we were not successful or anywhere close to 30 million, and I actually was laughed down a hallway about that ask, but you make the right ask and then you take the right gift, and our gift was that 2 million. But the agency has seen this thing went like hotcakes. The rebates were out the door like crazy, and reserved, 100% reserved even before they could be spent down. And so I think the agency understood the value of it. They are going to ask as a part of their budget, what we would call CSL, or current service level, for an additional 3 million into the account. So in terms of being kind of lucky to have the opportunity to support the agency in that ask, versus being the lone beggars and pleaders out there in the hallway, it's a really good position for us to be in this go round.
The Community Resiliency Grant Fund. Previously, the Department of Energy had a Renewable Energy Development Fund, the RED grant, and that sunsetted out a couple of years ago, but they were able to kind of keep the program open. And we still do have some of the same staffers that were running with that. So what this is it's a reboot of that, but it really comes in with a heavy resiliency focus. Resiliency meaning that we're including storage and microgrids, as well as EV charging tied specifically to solar. And there's a 25% carve out for projects to help low income Oregonians. This is again a bucket that we are asking legislators to firm up and shape and approve for us, so that federal funds, should they become available, can jump into that bucket. We can get going with some more good projects out there. Anything to add there?
Yes, of course, I have something to add. I would add that this is an incredible opportunity for, and this is probably not new to you all in your day-to-day conversation, but remember these 90 legislators, who have all these other day jobs, none of them doing what you do, live in this kind of their own little ecosystem in Salem. And I think this is an amazing messaging opportunity to start bringing renewables, to start bringing energy generation into this resiliency and emergency management framework. Obviously, it's a framework that's going to get a lot of attention, and it's a framework that's going to be bringing in different grants and streams of fundings. And so I think in terms of thinking about the agenda as an assistance in that regard would be a good move.
Yeah, good call. Oregon renewable options. This is interesting, and Kriya, I'm sure you're tracking on this because it actually comes from the irrigation districts, this concept. What this does is it provides a voluntary path for local governments and tribes or service districts to make decisions about their energy sources within the investor-owned utility space. So the concept is, let's say the coastal tribe says that currently is purchasing all of its electricity from Pacificor. That's our IOU that we have out on the coast is Pacificor. Says to Pacificor, hey, we've got some goals. We want to be net zero and we want some resilience. We want enough storage to keep up the Head Start building and the community services building and our police force during extended outages. And we want to go net zero energy by this time. They put that request out to the investor-owned utility and the public purpose charge. Remember, that's Energy Trust. And those two get together and come up with some solution sets that then they offer back to the tribal government or local service district. This is different from what California has, which is a CCA, and the utilities do not like that at all. So don't call this a CCA. The difference is just in that it gives the IOUs and the ETO the control. They're putting together the solution sets, the portfolio of options, and then the tribe or the local government decides if they want to pursue that or not. So pretty interesting concept there. Here's one that we're very, very, very supportive of. Regional transmission operator. In our presentations with Ocean, I've talked to you, probably you're so sick of talking about transmission and how important it is, but it really is so very important. And in other parts of the nation, you've got grids that are better organized, different states that get together and voluntarily collaborate on what their long-term transmission plans are going to be. Transmission, these are billion-dollar investment kinds of things. So it makes sense from us. That is the kind of thing that Oregon should be conversing about. So this bill doesn't even get it all the way there. This is a Renewable Northwest bill that specifically is just directing Department of Energy and the Public Utility Commission to investigate what the costs and benefits of joining into some kind of a regional transmission organization would be. So very, very much in support of this, clearly in alignment with our goals.
Anna, this is Erin Kester with Avangrid Renewables.
Yeah.
Just wondering if I can ask a question about that particular piece of legislation. How is this being run through the legislative process, and who are the key stakeholders here that would be bringing this into consideration?
You know what? I need an update because I believe that that Senator Golden, it was a Golden Power drop previously, but now neither of them is on the Energy Committee. So I'm not sure where that is, but Renewable Northwest has hired Thorn Run as their lobbyist. And I can get information back out to you if you'd like to connect directly, Erin.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
And thank you for that summary of all of these moving parts and pieces. Very helpful.
Absolutely. I'm going to step back a little bit here too. There are a couple of other items that we're tracking on. Ocean is looking forward either directly or through our strategic partners. The responses to the executive order, Department of Energy and Environmental Quality, they've got a big push for electrification of the transportation sector. And Ocean has been advocating for matching electrification of transportation with distributed renewable generation. When our public utilities or private utilities invest in electrification of transportation, it's a good investment for them. They make more money. That's more load that they are going to serve. If we don't touch our existing energy balance and continue to rely on imported energy, then increased transportation electrification means increased reliance on imported assets. So we totally support EV and electrification, and also support that there's a matching installation of renewable generation, even within a distribution system level. The Oregon Renewable Energy Siting Assessment will continue throughout this year. And we have another update later on this afternoon, and it's increasingly evident to us that we need to engage heavily with the contractors who are handling the electron side of that equation to make sure that they've got the best, most accurate, up-to-date information about offshore wind. Energy Facility Siting Council, EFSEC, this is something that ODO oversees. It's not going to touch floating offshore wind, but it does, again, when we're looking at utility scale, larger renewable energy deployment and getting it out around the state. That's definitely something that we're keeping our eyes on, and we'll be supporting our frontline coalition members in that. As well as the natural resource lead on the climate adaptation framework. DLCD put together a recommendation that there be a multi-agency task force, making sure that we are kind of shepherding our state along with our climate goals, whether they're mitigation or adaptive. But right now we don't really have anyone at the steering wheel. We've got lots of independent agency actions. And we really like this concept that there would be a driver overseeing all of this. And as I said, with the biennial energy report, accolades to ODO staff who did the 2020. We know that they need more resources and they need more authority so that they can actually do what needs to be done and have a really comprehensive, high resolution report that allows all of us to make better energy planning decisions around. I can pause there if anyone has any questions or comments about our agency kind of radar. And then in the public utility space, Ocean's gonna kind of back off. As I said, we invested a lot of time in the PUC's distribution system planning, and we were very successful. We're definitely we're on the radar, and the PUC, at least over on the Portland General Electric side, is definitely looking for ways to fund advocacy for groups like ours and tribal nations so that everyone can participate and not just those of us who feel like geeking out and donating a bunch of time in PUC stuff. There are so many important dockets still open at the PUC, including general capacity, brand new resource adequacy within the state. We've never had that before. Direct access, that's a procurement, a purchasing opportunity that may very well pertain to offshore wind. And as I said, we've got PacifiCorp out here on the coast. So definitely going to be directly showing up at their distribution system planning as Ocean and working through our affiliates, POET, Renewable Northwest, and Northwest Energy Council for PacifiCorp's integrated resource planning and the final push on their response and following through with their implementation to their response to the governor's executive order 2004. Again, that called for our agencies to establish a societal cost of carbon and to expedite our transition away from greenhouse gas emissions, and finally to mitigate and adapt to wildfires. And I think that is that. So I'm going to open it up if anyone has any questions or oh, I guess there is one more. The Northwest Power Planning and Conservation Council. This is a voluntary organization based out of the Northwest, and our investor-owned utilities definitely do participate there. They are in the throes of trying to publish their 2021 power plan. This is every 5 years they update. And there are some really big issues, underlying problems that we have with their modeling. Their first modeling right now is undervaluing even energy efficiency and shows a whole bunch of new natural gas plants. So we're definitely working with our coalition members as well as Power Plan Conservation Council staff to make improvements as quickly as possible before any of that is published there.
Shannon, question.
Yeah.
What group did you say was doing that 5-year planning?
Northwest Power Planning and Conservation Council.
Well, I used to serve on the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, and we would do 5-year plans. But it was mostly, well, it was a mixture. It was mostly planning for publicly owned utilities, PUDs and municipals, and co-ops, not private. I mean, they would participate with us, but they were not governed by our plan.
Exactly. It's voluntary, but they're definitely participating. And what's important to us about this bill is the signal that it sends. The plan is based on these scenarios that are modeled. There are 2 different software programs that they're using to come at it from different aspects. But the signal that is sent to our legislators and to our own PUC and to our international development community about what is or isn't included in that power plan and in that roadmap is really, really important. I'll tell you a little short story here. When we approached staff back in September, this would be we, Ocean, and Poet, to find out there's a part of the plan that talks about emerging technologies. These are technologies that, maybe they're not on the books and in the grid right now in our grid, but there's something to keep an eye on and include in the model. And we wanted to make sure that floating offshore wind was included as an emerging technology. It was not. Small batch nuclear reactors were included instead. Why? Is it because they're more viable or likely to be developed faster? Actually not. They have a longer range development timeline ramp up. The only reason was that the Power Planning and Conservation Council lost the staff member who was focusing on floating offshore wind, actually to Avangrid. Thanks a lot, Aaron. And Julian Charles, who was the other half who had been focusing on the small batch nuclear, that's what she understands and that's what she gets. Furthermore, that industry provided them with some really great baseline information. So we're faced with the 2021 power plan that lists nuclear instead of floating offshore wind as the emerging technology. And when we sat down to talk to those that are working on our state 100% RPS, the modeling team that was assembled for that from Grid Lab, they were making the assumption that the nuclear should be included in our base case. Why? Because that's what they included in the power plan. So these are the kinds of things that we're going upstream, finding out where did that assumption come from, what's going on. Let's correct the record, because yes, it's voluntary, absolutely, but it's powerful. The Northwest Power Pool and Conservation Plan is very, very powerful politically. So we want to make sure that we're represented there.
Shannon, this is Rick.
I agree with you. And as a former member, I would love to work with you to try to get that squared away.
Okay, cool. We've got a meeting with staff next week. I'll get you on the list. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Shannon. Hi, Bill. So while you're engaging with the council and while Mr. Bradbury is putting his oar in the water along, as you said, it's all about the scenarios. And the scenarios that are analyzed result in the decisions and the recommendations that are made. At the moment, the power plan does not consider what's categorized as high consequence, low frequency. So for the parts of the state that are transmission limited because we don't have generation like the coast, if the transmission goes down due to wildfires, wildfires are a high consequence, low frequency event, and the council doesn't consider those. The Cascadia event, what about the Cascadia event? High consequence, low frequency event. They don't consider that. So one of the things that we as citizens need to do is, if we're concerned about, the coast being without power for weeks, months, up to a year after the Cascadia event, then our legislators would hopefully be concerned, and the governor would be concerned, and our representatives on the council, because the council can direct the staff. Uniquely, and in closing, you mentioned the plan didn't include that because the staff didn't have this, the person to do it. When I tried to get energy resilience considered, I was told it wasn't included in the plan because the staff didn't have expertise in energy resilience, so they didn't want to write it into the plan. So, Mr. Bradbury, we've discussed this before, sir. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the law is very clear that the Power Council can consider whatever is necessary to looking at any kind of a plan. So, I mean, it's not like they're constrained from doing that because the law prevents them. It's just a question of what they allocate, what they prioritize their staff resources to do. So it's really something the council can affect.
So to put a point to that, in prior discussions, I've been told, well, we can't do that because it would take a change to the Northwest Power Act. I read the Northwest Power Act. Then I talked with Bill Bradbury, and the Northwest Power Act gives a lot of flexibility. When it was written, I don't think small modular reactors were considered, and that didn't take a change to the Northwest Power Act. So why can't the climate change induced wildfire threat to transmission and import and resource adequacy be considered? It can. Thank you for the thump here.
Excellent. No, thank you.
One thing I just add is it is true that in my time on the council, we were dealing with generating resources, and we're not specifically dealing with transmission. And basically, there weren't big issues with transmission at that time, but we basically sort of deferred to other transmission planning processes to get that transmission taken care of. So I'm not sure that we were prevented from dealing with transmission, but we just chose not to. I'd have to do a little bit more research on that to really check, but that's my memory.
Aaron, did you have your hand up? still?
Yeah, I did. I just have a quick question. Given all of this work, and let's not, just underscore the fact that everything that you presented today, it's just a tremendous amount of work. And just in terms of order of priority, obviously the legislative work seems to be the biggest bang for our buck and our time and our efforts to try to get something in place that will help advance offshore wind development in Oregon. What can we do to help support you, in some of this work? Can we reach out? Can we be communicating with some of these decision makers as well? What can the development community be doing to help you out?
That's a great question. Well, twofold. One is absolutely, we would love to get your help reaching out to the communities. We've had Business Network for Offshore Wind, kind of just loosely representing the international development community in our initial suite of meetings with those legislators on energy committees or in the Coastal Caucus. But more targeted direct would be fantastic, as well as with the governor's office. The governor's office should be hearing about the advocacy from the development community. Kind of an aside, I've got a meeting scheduled with the Coos County commissioners, and one of the commissioners said, well, I wasn't going to schedule a briefing on offshore wind because it's not happening. No one from the development community has approached me personally. So definitely the electeds like to know that the development community is interested. And on the other side, we would love, Ocean would love to get some funding together so that we can have, I would love to have Nikki representing us and know that her time is dedicated. She's tracking a lot of energy things. She's a wonderful friend, but I want her to be on Ocean's payroll, so to speak, so she can track and flag and help us push all of these efforts forward.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, you have my contact information if we need to have more specific conversations on, developing a comms plan or who might reach out to whom. Please, just reach out.
Absolutely. We've been trying to kind of like figure out how big to go when. We've got our drop piece that we've been leaving with our legislators. And really our focus right now has been to get on the agenda for both of those energy and environment committees to provide all of the legislators and any of those that are signing in to track what's going on in those committees with an update on this offshore wind opportunity. And then at that point, that's when we'll do more of an all hands on deck comm plan. Let's talk to everybody. And I will absolutely be talking to you, Aaron, and others. Does anyone have anything else for the good of the order? Or I really, really appreciate everyone taking your time. Oh, Mike MacArthur.
Just one other thing I would add. You did touch on storage, but recently Korea Board has endorsed including long-term utility grade storage in whatever bills are moving forward pertaining to renewable energy. So we're interested in pump storage. There's a couple of big projects moving forward on the east side. We're interested in the big battery storage, which pertains to resiliency, I think, for communities that want to be more resilient, and also hydrogen technology. And so whatever the 100% renewable bill looks like, we hope that it includes long-term storage.
And absolutely, we're in accord. I do serve on the technical advisory committee for Renewable Northwest in their work with Grid Lab. They are on track to present some clean energy pathways along the same time frame as this legislative session. So as we step forward, we can kind of get a look under the hood of what this 100% renewable portfolio would look like and where it will be built. And storage is absolutely tremendously paramountly important. And it's really not well addressed or recognized or monetized in any of the utility developed modeling at this point. So good work that needs to be done there, and great point, Mike. All right, well, I'm going to call that a wrap. Thank you all so much for attending. And remember, next month we will be featuring ROSA. They'll be talking to us about some of their research, environmental and science research agendas and priorities out here on the West Coast as they pertain to floating offshore wind.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.